Welcome to Let's Talk Rescaled, the podcast where we dive deep into the heart of justice reform. Hosted by Noa Shoshan and brought to you by RESCALED, a European movement dedicated to reshaping our approach to incarceration. In each episode, we explore the concept of detention houses instead of large prison institutions, shedding light on the voices, stories, and ideas that are transforming the landscape of justice across Europe and beyond. From policymakers to practitioners, advocates to academics, join us as we engage in insightful conversations with those on the front lines of systemic change.
Olta Qejvani is a lecturer of European law and has been teaching at the university level in Albania since 2016. She recently completed her PhD in Administrative Sciences at the National School of Political Sciences and Administrative Studies in Bucharest, Romania, where she focused on local and regional initiatives in the EU and how Albania approaches local referendums. She also published work on good governance, public administration, and Albania's path toward EU integration. With over a decade of experience across civil society, academia, and public administration, Olta has worked on improving policies, especially in public administration and civil service reform. Her time at the Prime Minister's office helped shape her expertise in policy development, and she's been an active voice in supporting youth participation and a key expert in civic engagement and European integration through her work with civil society.
Good afternoon, Olta. Thank you so much for coming on the Let's Talk Rescaled podcast. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon, Noah. Thank you very much for inviting me, and not as a prodigal of same, but a warm heart felt it. Good afternoon.
You're welcome.
I'm doing great, expecting summer, but also keeping some notes on a rescaled movement and how to position more concrete and to go with further steps.
Wonderful. I'm excited to dive deeper into it in this episode. I would like to ask you maybe to briefly introduce yourself a little bit. What is your profession? What are you doing on the day-to-day? How are you involved in justice reform? That would be really great for you to share.
I would be glad to invite to your table some of my personal and professional background in this regard. I have more than 10 years working as a lecturer and researcher in universities in Albania. So I explore, and what I love is to see how the legislation is being useful in the hands of the citizens' rights. This is basically my outline for my PhD studies, with my research skills and everything else. Regarding to that, in addition, I also like to explore how the human rights can be more institutionalized and how this is functioning. And this is something that got me curious when I first heard about the rescaled movement. And seeing your website, being part of your activities, meeting with you and with Veronique, seeing that how this mission is keeping with perfect balance between professional skills and personal feelings, it made me to save my time, to find some time to be involved in this regard. The very last symposium that you organized last year in March in Brussels made me think with very good areas on how this new methodology, let's say it for now, let's keep it for now as a methodology, can be very good in not only in my road path, but also to share and to bring the research skills into the very functioning and the heart mission of this movement. So this is why I'm here, and hopefully let's see how our matches and our collaborations will proceed so far.
Yes, thank you for sharing. That you were indeed one of the 30 country ambassadors during our symposium in March of 2024, and you came to Brussels for the event, and I think that was one of the first times that you met a lot of people from the Rescaled movement, I think, or maybe the very first time even. And you already shared a bit about it, but could you share more what you mean by the kind of professional, like the idea of the concept and the methodology and also personal feelings? Like, could you share a bit more what you mean by that?
Well, in this case, it's very hard to bring all the feelings and the mindset in this regard, but I will try to bring at least how I really see the rescaled movement mission and vision. I used first the word methodology. In my perception, as far as I know the rescaled movement, and as far as I'm approaching to you to the way how you implement this area, the small scale detention, the detention houses, it's not a new instrument. It's not a new methodology. In my perspective, it's something how you perceive the very functioning, the current and the future of the society. It's how the human rights spirit is everywhere being spread and surrounded. And I first heard a quote in the last symposium saying that when the prisons get bigger, the rehabilitation gets smaller. So this is why that we should work on that. No matter if our competencies are referred to the networking, to the research skills, to the legal framework, or to the policy, but it's a matter of how the penitentiary system and how we condemn people in our life, let's say it's simple, not in typical legal system, we can share and we can accept that even for some, let's say, not very important and hard crimes, we can have small prisons in our neighborhood. Let's not forget that at the moment that we are speaking in our neighborhoods, there are many crimes or violations that are already happening, and we are still in our homes. So basically, it seems a terrifying area or mission when people first hear that. But let's not forget that keeping the prisons with bureaucratic or institutionalized, it's the main or the last thing that the world can accept and can condemn crime. Sorry. In addition, when I first heard how different stakeholders from different countries in the last symposium, probably they had many thoughts, they had many doubts, which is quite normal, but it's very impressive to see how many 40 plus countries find this as a very common perspective, as a very good thing, at least to be understood, and rather it can be a very individual form set on how we implement this.
Yes.
So probably in Albania, this is the very first beginning on that. But I do really think that in the world that we are currently living in, we have many of sources of information. But I do stand with the idea that we need to be selective and to be very catchy and on how we learn that information. So I think that even on the other years that Rescales is operating, the information and the awareness must be the very top list of the things that it's a need to proceed. Also in European countries or also in the other countries that are quite far away with this concept. So probably to find some meaningful to the work that I'm doing, I find Rescaled as a very truly innovative thing, and this is why I expressed my desire to give myself into this mission, and also to learn many new areas where this road path is going to lead us all.
And it's very exciting. You just recently became an individual member of the Rescaled movement as well. Congratulations. As of May, yes, as of May 2025, you're officially also an individual member. But of course, you've been involved for much longer with the movement. I really love how you put it that it's not a new idea, it's not a new methodology, but it's many ideas and practices which have been existing in various areas or countries in Europe that we've kind of brought together. And found or created and co-created a platform for these stakeholders to speak together about these practices and about this shared mission. And that's a takeaway that I had as well from the symposium last year that you attended as well, that there is a general understanding, there's acknowledgement of the mission to support detention houses instead of large prison institutions. There is interest, there is even passion for it, but the conversation is really centered around how do we actually and realistically implement this, and what are the concrete steps that need to be taken. And I think rightfully so, and you mentioned this as well, that doubts and criticism are a natural part of that process, and they're even necessary, because it's only by addressing these concerns that we're also making sure that we do go through this process in the right way, and we implement detention houses in a way that we take our time to do it correctly, and to make sure that they are really embedded and integrated in the community, and we don't impose it on, for example, local citizens or other stakeholders who are then left to deal with how this would actually operate and function in practice. So it was really nice to see this, all these people and all these stakeholders coming together and asking questions and saying, oh, but we need more, and we need more resources, and how can we get to do this? And since then, we have taken quite a few steps to work on this more concretely. You mentioned that also awareness raising and sharing resources is one of the most important activities to reach that goal. And you, of course, coming from Albania and having that perspective, and also the perspective of the Balkans, could you share a bit more about the situation of prisons and detention facilities in your country, maybe just to give a perspective next to what Rescaled is proposing?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to Albania, it's interesting that when I thought first when coming in the symposium, and rather during my research in different areas on the penitentiary system, Albania, it's a very unique area in this regard. On the other hand, probably in an indirect manner, we do have very Europeanized values for the justice reform, for the minors, for the rights into prisons and everything else. Recently, if I must say, in the last 10 years, during the fact that we are under the European integration, and we daily and each year we take what we must approach, what we must do differently, there are some good reforms doing in this regard. So the legislative package, when we mention many times the word rehabilitation, so our main purpose and our spirit of law in the criminal code, in the criminal code for minors as well, and in the other legislative patterns, we do mention into the level of the principles and to implementation the word rehabilitation. And through many different projects that the civil society is implementing, we paid attention on that. I've personally been part of Terre des Hommes and Save the Children when I managed to draft local action plans for youth voice rights and justice. I've also drafted some manuals on how the youth in different areas, I think it's 8 regions in Albania, must be rehabilitated through, let's say, to find some employment statement under the local businesses and everything else. If I must set a conclusion, I must think that into the level of principles, Albania has made some steps on the criminal offenses and on the how we perceive and how we want the rehabilitation to be, which is a very good start to make a rescaled movement a very closer away approach. Into the level of implementation, unfortunately, during the statistics in regions or in Europe, we are mentioned to be on the very top list on having very crowded prisons. On the pretrials and everything else, the last statistic was 59 in pretrial detention, which means that on the other hand, we see that the system and the institutions are very operating and catching the offenses and everything else. But on the other hand, the bigger that these prisons should be, there are no many much left spaces for rehabilitation and everything else. What I must say that it's a very good point to start is the last version of the criminal code for minors, which set up a very new institutional background, which is totally a very attention catcher from the donors, from the different international areas and everything else. If I speak methodologically, this legislative and policy making package is already a good start to be catchy and to base our mission and to start our mission. What is, let's say, a problem into the level of implementation is that we still have the mindset of, let's say, completing and fulfilling the bureaucracies in a prison. So we still have the difficulties on how a call is made, or how if we call it a call according to the law or a video call or everything else. So still the employment staff, which is already into the prisons, and I do not blame them for doing that, they follow the rules, and they do not have many flexibility to see the spirit of the law, but they follow the rules and the technical ones. But to stay on the positive side of view, I still think that the legislative package and the policy making, it's good because it gets from the Europe. It gets from something needed from the European rules, which is quite a good start. Into the implementation, of course, that if I ask you also in the Brussels or Netherlands and everything else, when things have progressed, I think that the level of implementation still, it's that we do have the traditional mindset of prisons, that people that have been condemned, that are criminals and everything else, they need to be stuck there. And also it is the balance between the rehabilitation things and the how we make them suffer. I would like to mention two milestones coming from the civil society that have progressed this. This year we've started Erasmus Plus project founded, which is a co-ed academy. And I am one of the members of the partners, together with the Center for Comparative and International Studies, doing in this project. What this project has already started to fill out is that we want that in the end of the project, we want to bring the correctional justice, the small detention houses into the curriculum of the universities. And we are many partners from the region, which it gives us a very good possibility to explore into this area, and at least to make us compatible with three results: the research centers being established in each of the universities, being partners in this project, and also putting this correctional justice into the curricula, which makes a lot of space for stakeholders, for researchers, lecturers, teachers, and everything else to have more space in this level of understanding. And the co-ed academy, which is also a very good initiative to be mentioned, these are probably, may sound like very small milestones, mentioning you the Europeanized legislative package, the co-ed academy initiative, the justice reform, which I mentioned. But I do think that these are very good settlements to go with this initiative. So at least I do not find Albania a very barren land or a very vague thing to start with. But I do find difficult on how to make, to find the appropriate match to understand and to make different stakeholders believe and do work on the small detention houses and the other visions that Rescaled movement has.
think bringing the topic of justice reform and detention houses into the university program can really pave the way towards evidence-based policy. Not only can there be research outputs, but also more awareness among students, but also staff of the university and people who either will work within the system or with the system at a later point in time. So I think that is very smart and a very important step to be taking, especially more so in the beginning of a process when it comes to this. What I like that you illustrated really nicely, and I'll just briefly repeat it for the listeners who may or may not have already been listening to this podcast quite a bit. In that case, of course, but when we speak of detention houses, we speak of them being small scale, a maximum of 30. They're differentiated in terms of security measures or levels of autonomy, but also like education and work opportunities, and then really integrated in the community in terms of, for example, how visitation is facilitated, but also collaboration with local support services, either that they come into the detention house or people are able to leave the detention house during the day and go see their service providers in the community. That coming from the system that we know now in Europe in many countries is, of course, a really big change. And I think what you illustrated really nicely in all the examples you just mentioned was the different areas and facets that you need to be able to change, or where you need to be present, where you need to cultivate and co-create that mindset to really achieve systemic change, to really achieve a paradigm shift. Because what we have seen is that we can have good pilot projects, we could even have legislation changes, we could have policies which include detention houses, such as the policy of a Ministry of Justice, for example. But all of that won't do really much in practice on the long term if we don't work on that narrative change, if we don't work on the mindsets. Like you said, for staff, it is a really tough job to do sometimes, considering also the conditions of specific European prison systems. Like you mentioned, in Albania, you're also struggling with overcrowding. There's lots of processes. There's a lot of bureaucracy because it is an institution, and it doesn't leave them with a lot of discretionary space to, take other routes or even to do what their job is actually supposed to be, because they're stuck dealing with the crisis conditions that they are at that moment working and also living in a way. And so I think that really has a lot to do with culture change as well, and culture shift, which has to take place at the level of various stakeholders. So not only staff, but also management, of course, also the ministries. And I really like how you displayed these various opportunities that you also see in Albania, because you mentioned, yes, there are obstacles, but you also want to be positive because you feel like there's really a way in, there is interest, there's many starting points to potentially see how people feel towards the concept of detention houses. And I think even considering your specific context of Albania, of potentially neighboring countries, and comparing that to, I think you mentioned Belgium and the Netherlands, we have quite different contexts sometimes in terms of politics, in terms of the prison population, for example, and different legislation. But when we look at obstacles or institutional barriers, we often see that they're quite similar. So what you mentioned, for example, with bureaucracy or overcrowding, in one way or another, it's quite often similar obstacles that we're dealing with, which I think makes it really interesting to exchange with each other within the Rescaled movement and learn from each other. How did you deal with this obstacle, or how are you currently dealing with this obstacle? And also, joining forces and seeing how we can help each other out to, create a dialogue with the stakeholders and address these obstacles. I think it is interesting to see how in varying contexts we do kind of see similar patterns. So thank you for explaining that as well. If I were to ask you, could you imagine a detention house in your neighborhood right now? Like, considering the legislation that you mentioned, the kind of awareness, the interest, would that work? Or would you say, what would be concrete steps that you feel like, aside from what you mentioned, like starting with university and all of that, what are things that you really want to know more about potentially from other countries or from the Rescaled movement?
Well, it's difficult to say and to come in a conclusion. it takes me some time to say a direct yes or direct no. As far as I know my country, I was born here. I've learned even the personal and the professional perspective here in Tirana, in Albania, and in different cities of the country. Probably the way how the social behavior and the politics, I must say that there is no, let's say, there's no attention at all to the small scale detention. It is not even a very known concept. Of course, the rehabilitation, the good policies to improve the penitentiary houses, these are common backgrounds that even the institutions have been learning from each other through the different donors, to different projects and everything else. But if I must draft to, I don't know, to the Minister of Justice and say that, look, I want a very small house having like 20 or 30 people in my neighborhood, and because this is the RESCALED movement, probably I must sound a little bit crazy and a little bit how I found out this idea. Of course, that I do still believe that each of the lobbyists or each of the persons and the institutions that takes the role on to convince the other stakeholders must be very technical, communicative, and have very brilliant skills on how to serve that on the table. But this is not an obstacle, because you get some trainings, you get in contact with the RESCALED, and you prepare like 1, 2, or up 10 people that takes the role on doing that. If I might list some, I don't know, relevant baby steps on how we go into this area, in my personal feeling is that it's not a good idea to play with the top and bottom up perspective. We go from the bottom and top up level. What I really do think, and I've already shared to the General Assembly, in Albania there is a very positive impact that the network of researchers in the civil society and in academia, they are very keen on and very interested to explore new areas. Let's speak on being like a little bit of pragmatic. I'm a lecturer. I need to, let's say, to write articles as part of my configuration and job and everything else. And sometimes, let's admit that it's very difficult to find new areas. You repeat yourself after 5, 10, or 15 years. In this regard, RESCALED movement, it's totally something innovative into the level of conception. And if you bring this to the network of the academics and researchers, this must be the first target group that might find some interest. They might explore statistic, qualitative data. They might be very curious to knock on your doors and to see what is happening. This was basically more or less than my case. I first heard from my friend and colleague, and then I've explored and see how this can fit to my area. And this can be the case of many academics and civil society as well. So I see that if we play on the awareness and lobbies first into the universities and into the civil societies, this can be the first background that needs to spread up the information. They catch it. They explore more, they research more. And let's admit that first, it's not only the difficulty of understanding the movement and understanding the vision, but let's admit that there are a lot of research patterns, not only referring to the technical parts, but also how to keep the country context with this new change of system that we are pretending to do so. And these two main target groups can be the very first area that we knock and we bring the concept. In this way, we probably, it may sound a very small baby step, but it's important and it promises long-term sustainability in this regard. Because if after 3 or 4 years, we do 1 or 2 examples in different neighborhoods, we do have proofs on that. We do have researchers. We do have people that have been experienced, and they have been experienced in Albania, not like in different countries. And then we come in Albania and see that look what I found in my PhD or something less or more. So this can be a very pragmatic, a very realistic, and the thing that it can be done. So it promises results. I might not say right now it can be 1, 200 or 5 lectures or researches, but there is a secure number that is going to do that. Even one article, even one thought, even one, I don't know, simple research in official gazette or journal or everything else. But in this way, we spread the information. And probably after other years that or months or I don't know, this target group can be eligible and can be officially serious on how they play and how they lobby to the policymakers. Because having contacts and being part of a wider network during our job, but we go with very good competencies. We go trained and we go ready even to when the other part is going to say a terrible no, or even that the other part at least to be curious on that area. I consider the last thing as a very good motion. If we get the attention of people and the policymakers, at least we catch their time and their availability on how they want to understand and approach this. This is definitely a win-to-win situation. And let's not forget that even Rome has not been established for one day. So
Absolutely.
I'm not pretending to bring only the positive sets, but at least to be on the common grounds and see it, how it works from the very first level. But in the right moment, it's not a very good idea that I don't know, we settle a meeting. Of course, that we can use the context, and we go there unprepared. First, we need to prepare ourselves, and then to pretend to go with very good matches, and we give proofs. We ask, but we already share with them what we know and what we have done so far. This is how I see at the very first beginning. It may sound very far away from establishing and getting the license of a small detention hound in my neighborhood, but let's not forget that on the other hand, sometimes it can be very tricky and it takes more time to convince the citizens and the community rather than institutional. So I'm not very good on putting on a very good level, which is the hardest thing to reach. But there are many. I consider these are two outcomes that you need to pay attention at the same time, probably.
I think the small steps that you mentioned make a lot of sense, and I don't think it sounds far away from materializing the mission of having and implementing a detention house. In all honesty, my question of could you see a detention house in your neighborhood is a little bit of a trick question, because of course that doesn't happen from one day of another. But it's interesting to hear what your reflections are on what the next small and concrete steps could be that you take. And I heard and I echo that as well, what you said of systemic change needs to be community driven. It needs to be supported. You mentioned from the bottom up, it needs to be supported by everyone in the communities because that's essentially where we want to be. That's where we want detention houses to find a place as well. And I think looking at Rescaled, looking at our mission and vision and all the people who we've worked with, that's also where we find our core values and where we find our motivation to do this work. Because the people who are now targeted by the justice system, let's say, or affected by the justice system as well, they are coming from communities. Even crime comes from our communities. You mentioned this at the very beginning of the episode. So that is really the core place where you need to be. And I do believe that it might take more time and it might be more difficult to convince them than, for example, a policymaker. But just because it's not super easy work doesn't mean, of course, that we go for it. If we look at Rescaled and our members as well, if you look at the European developments regarding detention houses, there's lots of differences, but that's also because some countries have been specifically working on this mission for a longer time already. Other countries just have more challenging conditions to work in, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's very interesting to see these various stages of developments and how even in a country that if you might compare at the level of implementation, they're not as far. We are still learning from them because they are taking different steps when it comes to awareness raising, for example. And that again can help a country which is already much further in the process of implementation. So there's a really interesting interchange between this. And what is key, and I'd like to also highlight that you mentioned that we can't just import a specific model or a way of implementing a detention house. We can't import a piece of research from another context, another legislative framework, another political climate, and, for example, import that to Albania and say, oh, here, this research says that this and this is beneficial. The research needs to be done in Albania as well. And I think that's very important. Again, also to have it be community driven because it is by your community and not a community, of course, in another country. So I think that is very important to, I think, stand still and realize that it is a longer process. But that's only natural if we think about the prison system that we currently have. We've known it for, let's say, 200 years, and not that much and not that many big changes have happened since then. And also these changes have taken quite a lot of time. So I think guarding that positive attitude that you have as well, and that hope is actually really key to focusing on what are the steps that we can take and how can we form bonds over our shared mission, but also even our differences, and have dialogues and have conversations about these doubts could really bring us closer to potentially seeing what could detention houses look like in Albania and maybe the neighboring region. But I think we are excited, of course, also to take these steps with you, more so from the research perspective, and see what comes out of it in the next coming months and even years. I think it's exciting.
Let's save the realistic hope at least. So it's very good that we have this in common ground. Then after we convince, of course, that it doesn't matter if Belgium or Netherlands or another country have another methodology, we import somehow and we adapt somehow our own methodology. But first, let's save our realistic hopes, which is best counting for all of us that we are involved in this area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think based on that, it would be nice this would be a nice moment to end the podcast episode as well. Is there any last thought that you would want to share about what you mentioned today, or something that you will take with you going forward in the next period?
Well, I do truly believe that also for myself, this is the very first beginning and the very first steps. But what counts is that each of the collaborations and being closer to Rescaled has been meaningful, which is a very good example, not only to share my insights, to share my thoughts, and which can be right or wrong, I don't know, but I want that at least people that hear our podcast can think and how can be personally and community motivated. Probably being positive in this mission and vision, it's not always possible to keep on track and to believe most of the time that things are going to change faster or not. But what counts is that we all know, or trying to know ourselves, our country context, our positive things that where we need to catch ourselves on, and our difficulties. It's not impossible, and probably the results seem to be very far away. But if we change even only a very small portion on our traditional system, this is a very winning flag that we all need and we all deserve to celebrate. Probably this is not something that we pretend that the president or the prime minister of the countries must set up in their everyday agenda, but this is something that comes into the very good merit of human rights. It's for the good of all of the society. So nowadays we see many wars, we see many different or strange things happening worldwide. And probably if we do something that we can in our areas, this is more than enough. Not trying to sound very philosophical or like very doing some recipes on how to find happiness, but at least to be realistic and to be on track on doing things that have good purpose and what is important that serves to us all, which is very good and for the personal development and for democracy as well. And if I can end up with another a quote that I've opened already at the very first beginning of the podcast.
Yes, please.
If we don't have a road, at least we take efforts to build that. So this is the only way. There is not
beautiful. I love that quote.
Another way to find and to match things. I'm very happy to share you with the podcast, and I welcome any thoughts or insights that people that are going to see this episode can address. I don't know, insight, reflections, or questions. And of course, we keep up our energies to find and to bring the small-scale detention closer even to Albania and even to the region.
Absolutely. We'll drop some information on how to potentially get in touch with you if anyone would like to continue the conversation with you on some of the points that you mentioned. So if we don't have a road, we will build one. Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in while we talked Rescaled. We hope today's episode has inspired you to think differently about incarceration and the possibilities for positive change in our communities. To learn more about Rescaled and our mission to support the use of detention houses, visit our website at www.rescaled.org or follow us on social media for the latest updates. Be sure to follow along for more thought-provoking discussions and join us as we sit down with our next guest and continue to explore the path towards building communities that are safe, inclusive, and sustainable. Please also do feel encouraged to reach out to us because we would love to hear your thoughts on shaping the future of detention. Let's keep talking, let's keep listening, and let's keep pushing for a justice system that truly serves all. This is Noa Shoshan signing off for Let's Talk Rescaled.